There comes a point when you lose the strength to speak. So you hand over the microphone, not to a person, but to the emotions themselves. You let anger step up to the mic, the ember you've been hiding under your tongue. You let sadness take the stage, then guilt, then shame. They steal your voice. And for months, they've been repeating the same brutal refrain, a choice. To die or to kill. To stop absorbing the world in silence. They sound like executioners, but they swear they're my bodyguards. They hit hard, they're violent, and yet they claim they're carrying a message. A message they demand we finally understand. Okay, wow, let's unpack this. That's a really powerful, almost brutal way to put it. And it sets up our mission for today perfectly, doesn't it?
It really does.
We're diving deep into this core idea that these intense, sometimes overwhelming feelings, anger, sadness, guilt, shame, they aren't just weaknesses. They're not flaws we need to get rid of.
Right. The idea is that they're actually complex functional signals. They're demanding our attention. And maybe more importantly, they're demanding some kind of purposeful action from us.
It's about listening to the message, like the opening said.
Exactly. And what's really fascinating here, I think, is how this shifts the whole paradigm. Especially when you look at some of the modern psychological approaches, particularly those gaining ground in Europe.
Oh, so?
Well, we often treat these big emotions almost like diseases, things to be cured or suppressed. Just push them down.
Yeah, get rid of them.
But what if they're actually critical tools? Instruments for adaptation, for survival even. Adaptive mechanisms designed to protect you, help you define your boundaries, maybe even push you towards necessary growth.
So not executioners, but bodyguards, like in the intro. Or maybe like an internal technical crew.
That's a great way to think about it, an internal crew. So we're going to explore how we move past seeing them as purely destructive forces.
Yeah.
And maybe start, using them constructively, understanding their job description, basically.
Okay, let's start with anger. That's the big one, often. The ember hidden under the tongue. It feels explosive, socially unacceptable sometimes. It feels destructive internally and maybe externally. But the idea here is it's claiming to be a bodyguard. How do we even begin to reconcile that? Why would this feeling that makes us want to lash out actually be trying to help?
It's a great question. The key, I think, is seeing anger as pure energy. Kinetic energy, really.
Yeah.
It's getting you ready for movement, for action.
Okay.
Biologically, anger is, at its root, a signal. It triggers an adaptive response. And it's usually telling you one of two critical things. Either a really important need isn't being met, or some kind of fundamental boundary has been crossed. Violated, even.
Right, like someone stepping over a line?
Exactly.
Yeah.
And when you feel that frustration, your limbic system, the amygdala especially, kicks in. It initiates the fight part of the fight, flight, freeze response. You get that surge of adrenaline, cortisol. It's mobilizing you, preparing you for defense.
So the goal in therapy, or just in understanding ourselves, isn't to rip out the alarm system.
Oh.
Because you probably can't anyway.
Right, you can't. And you probably wouldn't want to, even if you could.
It's more like reprogramming the response. Instead of seeing the flashing red light and wanting to smash the control panel, you recognize, okay, the temperature's critical here. What needs to change?
Precisely. If we look at therapeutic reframing, we move away from seeing aggression only as a negative outcome. Some early theories pretty much linked frustration directly to aggression, full stop. But a more nuanced view recognizes the energy itself is neutral. It's how it's channeled that matters. Think about that imagined case study. Elise, the project manager in Lyon.
Yes, Elise.
Her anger wasn't just random flare-ups. It was this consistent low-grade heat that spiked whenever she faced those microaggressions. Colleagues interrupting her constantly.
Or the manager calling her passionate when she was just being assertive and, frankly, competent.
Exactly. Dismissing her feedback like that, that's a classic boundary violation in a professional setting.
And the advice she got was probably, just calm down, be nice.
Of course, suppress it. But that suppression didn't make it go away. It just manifested physically. That knot in her stomach, the stress headaches, clenching her jaw in meetings.
That's the blocked signal, isn't it? The energy getting trapped.
Perfectly put. Her anger became this incredibly accurate, personalized alarm system. It was signaling that her professional identity, her boundaries, were being eroded, chipped away.
So therapy wasn't about getting rid of the anger.
Not at all. It was about helping her translate that heat, that energy, into assertive language, using it for course correction, you could say.
So instead of imploding.
Right. Instead of internal combustion, she learned to channel that energy into a clear, calm statement. I need you to wait until I finish my point. Or, Actually, I see my input as assertive and data-driven, not just passionate.
Wow. So the shift is huge. Anger's mission isn't to abattre, to strike down or destroy. It's to forger, like forging steel, to forge your voice, your presence.
Yeah.
The outrage becomes a kind of measuring stick, a mitre-à-talons. For injustice, you just can't tolerate anymore. It moves from internal damage to outward constructive assertion, setting a clear standard.
Beautifully summarized. Now, if anger is often about boundaries being crossed from the outside, shame. Shame is more about your place within the group. It deals with belonging. Shame signals rejection, or maybe more accurately, the belief that you're fundamentally flawed, not as good as others, not worthy of acceptance. It pops up when you feel judged, exposed, that there's something deeply wrong with you.
And that's why it feels so uniquely paralyzing, because it attacks your core identity, your sense of worth.
Exactly. It cuts right to the core, which makes it incredibly difficult to handle.
And society seems pretty good at using that paralyzing force, doesn't it?
We talk about shame as a moral fuel. You can see, historically, thinking about Foucault and surveillance ideas like the panopticon.
Right. The fear of being watched, judged, exposed. It keeps people in line. Shame enforces conduct through that constant low-level fear of being seen as other or unacceptable.
Which makes the therapeutic reframing of shame so vital. Because the goal isn't, and probably can't be, to just eliminate shame entirely. That feels unrealistic.
So what's the alternative?
It's about transforming its function.
Yeah.
Let's think about Inez, the example of someone devastated after a breakup. She felt exposed, defective, like the breakup proved she was fundamentally flawed.
Haunted by shame.
Deeply. But as she explored it, she started to see that the shame was, in a strange way, trying to protect her. It was acting like a shield, albeit a misguided one.
How so? Protecting her from what?
Protecting her from being vulnerable again, from opening up to deep emotional connection, because that would risk more pain, more potential rejection. The shame was saying, don't go there again, it's too dangerous.
Ah, I see. So the transformation, you mentioned it stops being a cachot, a dungeon of self-judgment.
And becomes pudeur. That's a tricky word to translate directly into English. Modesty or discretion don't quite capture it.
It's more active than that.
Yes. Pudeur implies a conscious, self-protective reserve. It functions like a filter. It moves you from being crushed by judgment to consciously setting your own boundaries about vulnerability.
So if the original shame locks you in that dungeon, pudeur gives you the key. You get to choose who sees what.
Exactly. You choose your witnesses, you exercise discretion, protect your authentic core self, and decide who has earned the right to see your vulnerabilities. It's an active choice about exposure, not just a passive reaction to perceived judgment.
That makes sense. And, we can't really talk about these intense boundary emotions like anger without touching on aggression itself. Can aggression ever be adaptive?
Well, that's where the humanistic perspective, particularly from Fritz Perls, the founder of Gestalt therapy, comes in. He made a really important distinction.
Okay.
He distinguished between simple destruction, just tearing things down, and what he called constructive demolition.
Constructive demolition sounds like a contradiction in terms.
It does, initially. But think of it as the necessary effort to deconstruct something old or unhelpful so that something new can be built. Perls was really focused on integration.
Integration?
Yeah, to truly assimilate something, whether it's a new idea you're learning, a behavioral change you're trying to make, even digesting a meal, you have to break it down first. You have to analyze it, digest it, integrate it into your existing system.
Like chewing your food properly.
Exactly. Aggression, when it's channeled constructively, is the force that allows you to do that breaking down, that analysis. It facilitates dynamic adaptation.
I like the concept, I really do. But here's the pushback, maybe. How do you stop constructive demolition from just becoming, destruction with a fancy excuse? Where's the line? Isn't our tendency towards confirmation bias a huge risk here?
That is the million-dollar question, isn't it? It's a critical distinction.
Yeah.
The line, I think, is defined by purpose and outcome. Destructive aggression often aims to inflict pain, maybe indiscriminately, or just tear something down for the sake of release. Constructive demolition is targeted. It's necessary. And it's usually followed immediately by the task of rebuilding or assimilating something new.
So back to Elise. Her constructive demolition wasn't yelling at her boss?
No. It was the targeted, assertive energy she used to articulate her boundary clearly and professionally. That act demolished the old compliant pattern of just taking it. It was goal-directed towards creating a healthier dynamic.
Right. So the implication is really profound then. If you don't engage in this kind of demolition when needed, you end up accumulating what you called introjects.
Yes. Introjects. These are the unassimilated bits and pieces from the outside world. Those parental instructions you never questioned, the rigid societal rules you just swallowed whole, the moral pronouncements you accepted without really chewing them over to see if they fit your current reality.
Like running on outdated software because you never challenged the initial programming?
That's a perfect analogy. If you don't use that bit of assertive analytical energy, that constructive aggression, to break these things down and see if they still serve you, they just sit there, unintegrated. And they absolutely hinder your adaptation. Aggression isn't always a fist fight. Sometimes it's just the necessary effort to chew on reality and decide what you actually want to swallow.
Okay, let's shift gears a bit. Let's move to the quieter, but maybe equally powerful emotions, starting with sadness. That opening description. The rain that cleanses the ashes after the storm. It's poignant. It's proof that you still feel something, a refusal of anesthesia.
It's beautiful, isn't it? And it captures something important. Sadness is so often seen as just a deficit, a lack, a problem to be fixed. But from an adaptive perspective, it's actually a crucial response. It initiates a biological stage for necessary, well, deceleration, repair,
Acceleration.
like hitting the brakes. Exactly. When you face a significant loss or disappointment, your brain doesn't just shut off randomly. It seems to intentionally reduce exposure to the outside world, dial down certain circuits. It's a reply, a strategic retreat.
Conserving energy.
Yes, partly an energy conservation strategy. It allows for healing, for introspection, before you have to restart the assault of life, as the description put it. It's like putting the engine in neutral after a really hard drive, letting things cool down.
Okay, that makes biological sense.
And evolutionary psychology suggests this period of lower motivation, maybe some social withdrawal, allows your mind to process what happened, to cycle through a kind of failure analysis without the pressure of having to perform immediately.
Because if you just jumped right back in.
You might just repeat the same mistake or pattern that led to the loss. Sadness kind of forces you to pause, integrate the lesson, maybe recalibrate your approach. It could be a mechanism for really complex long-term problem solving, ironically.
We should probably acknowledge the scale of this too, especially thinking about the context in France, for example. Symptoms of depression aren't some rare thing. The data suggests roughly 1 in 8 people are affected.
That's right.
When something is that widespread, it shifts the perspective, doesn't it? It's not just an individual failing, it's a major public health reality. It says something about the pressures or conditions of modern life, perhaps.
Absolutely. And that context is vital for destigmatization. Think about the example of Manon, the new mother, struggling with postpartum sadness, and that intense guilt she felt for not feeling instantly bonded or joyful.
Yeah, the expectation versus the reality.
A huge part of her self-criticism was feeling like she was uniquely broken, uniquely defective as a mother. But seeing that public health data, realizing she wasn't alone, that she was part of this larger group of the living who feel too much, that started to ease the isolation.
And then there was that campaign poster she saw. The message was simple but powerful. Sadness is not a weakness. It's the measure of your love.
That reframe is critical. Seeing the sadness not as a personal failure, but as evidence of her deep emotional engagement, her capacity for love, which was just completely overwhelmed at that moment, changes everything.
How so?
It stops being a defect you need to hide and becomes an acknowledgement of the sheer intensity of the experience, the depth of her emotional investment. And that shift makes it possible to reach out, to seek support, because the feeling itself is no longer a self-condemnation.
That's a powerful shift. Okay, let's talk about guilt. The description framed it as those internalized punishing voices, the teachers, bosses, moral figures from our past maybe, imposing all those you should have statements. It often feels like self-torment because it can seem endless, right? Just replaying mistakes.
Exactly. When guilt gets misdirected or becomes chronic, it absolutely functions as self-punishment. It's often tied up with anxiety about disappointing others or the deep fear of losing love or social standing. Paralyzing guilt often tries to make you small, invisible, hoping you'll be spared further judgment if you just stay quiet.
But functional guilt, there's a difference.
There is. Properly channeled, functional guilt isn't about beating yourself up. It acts more like a boussole, a compass. It's designed to guide you towards corrective action, towards making amends.
So the key difference between the paralyzing kind and the useful kind is is it about facts?
Yeah.
About whether you actually did something wrong?
That's a huge part of it. Guilt is only really productive if it motivates you towards repair and accountability. If it just keeps you stuck in self-blame, it's not serving its purpose.
So how do you transform it from that supplice, that torment, into a learning tool?
There's a simple mental hygiene exercise you can use. It's
Okay.
basically a way to challenge that punishing voice and test the validity of the guilt against reality.
Okay, I'm listening.
You ask yourself 3 specific factual questions. 1, did I truly harm someone with my actions or inaction? Be honest and specific.
Okay.
2, if yes, whom did I harm? Name them, even if it's just in your head. Make it concrete.
Yep.
And 3, how can I genuinely repair the harm, or at least acknowledge it and learn from it? What action can I take?
And the power is in that third step.
Absolutely. Because if the answer to question 1 is no, I didn't actually harm anyone, then the feeling probably isn't functional guilt. It might be shame or anxiety or someone else's expectations you've internalized. In that case, you acknowledge the feeling, thank it for trying to protect you perhaps, and then you consciously dismiss it. It's not yours to carry.
And if the answer is yes,
Then the focus immediately shifts. It moves from I am a bad person to I did something that caused harm and now we need to focus on fixing it. That third question forces external action, or at least a concrete plan for accountability. It breaks that internal loop of just feeling bad about yourself.
so you refuse to just carry the feeling, especially if it was maybe unfairly put upon you, and you focus only on the measurable damage you might have caused and how to repair it.
Exactly. It's an act of mental self-governance. You're taking control of the narrative around your actions.
It feels like there's a clear link here. This internal landscape of intense, challenging feelings like guilt and sadness. It doesn't happen in a vacuum. It's reflected in society, and society or the state has to respond.
Definitely.
Let's look at how France, for example, started translating this widespread emotional distress into tangible policy. It seems the COVID-19 pandemic was a huge catalyst for finally recognizing this need publicly.
It really was. The data that came out from Santé Publique France, the public health agency, was stark. It was undeniable. The pandemic didn't necessarily create all these issues, but it dramatically accelerated existing mental health problems and brought them out into the open.
Especially among young people, right? The trends were quite alarming there.
Extremely alarming. Starting in early 2021, there was a significant surge in emergency room visits for things like suicidal gestures, suicidal thoughts, and mood disorders. And this was particularly pronounced among kids aged 11 to 17.
The 11-14 group showed the biggest jump I remember reading.
That's right. And even after some other disorder rates started to stabilize a bit in 2022, the rates of suicidal ideation remained stubbornly high. That sustained distress sent a really clear signal. There was a profound unmet need for better access to support, better interventions across all ages, but urgently for young people.
So how did the French government respond? What concrete measures came out of this recognition?
They implemented several key initiatives, really aiming to both expand accessibility, make it easier to get help, and also work on destigmatizing mental health care. The model seems to be tiered, addressing different levels of need.
Okay, so what are the tiers?
Well, you've got immediate crisis intervention, then shorter-term support for less severe issues, and then ongoing prevention and education efforts.
Let's start with the crisis level, the National Suicide Prevention Hotline.
Right, that's 3114. It was implemented back in October 2021. It provides free, confidential 247 access to trained professionals. And it's being used. Since it launched, it's handled tens of thousands of calls, over 25,000 reported fairly early on.
And a significant number lead to immediate help.
Yes. Estimates were around 10 to 15% of calls resulted in immediate assistance being dispatched. So it establishes that critical first point of contact for people in acute distress, treating it like the emergency it is.
Okay, so that's the immediate crisis safety net. What about breaking down barriers for sort of everyday psychological support? That's where the Monsai scheme comes in.
Correct. That was a big systemic change launched in 2022. The idea is to reimburse psychological support sessions, making it more affordable. It covers up to 8 sessions per year for patients aged 3 and older who have mild to moderate psychological difficulties.
So treating mental health care a bit more like physical health care in terms of insurance coverage.
That's the goal. People with more severe conditions would still generally need subsidized psychiatric care through the existing system. But Monsai aims to lower the financial hurdle for that crucial early intervention for common issues like anxiety or mild depression.
Now, the concept sounds great, but didn't the implementation face some real challenges? We should probably touch on that too for a balanced picture.
Oh, absolutely. And this is relevant anywhere, trying similar things. While the idea of reimbursed care is a big step, the rollout in France hit some bumps.
Like what?
Well, first, the limit of 8 sessions per year. Many psychologists and patient groups argue that's just not enough for many issues, even mild to moderate ones. Therapy often takes longer than that.
Right.
Second, there were infrastructural hurdles. General practitioners, the GPs, have to make the initial referral into the scheme. But reports suggested many GPs were either resistant, maybe unfamiliar with the system, or just too overwhelmed already, leading to slow uptake.
And finding psychologists willing to participate.
That was another major issue. There seems to be a persistent shortage of qualified psychologists signing up for the scheme. Some cited the reimbursement rates as being too low compared to their private practice fees. So even with the scheme in place, actual access remained quite unequal depending on where you lived.
So the takeaway is complex. Access is the goal, the political translation of that emotional need we talked about. But building the infrastructure to actually deliver that access equitably, that's a whole other challenge. It takes more than just policy announcements.
Exactly. And beyond Monsi, there was also a clear focus on youth. Things like Fil Santé Jeune, which is a free, anonymous helpline and online resource specifically for 12 to 25-year-olds.
Meeting young people where they are, often online, or seeking anonymous help first.
Precisely. And initiatives like the Le Kit de Vie, the Life Kit, developed by the Student Support Association, Nightline France. It's a digital toolbox focused on well-being, stress management, practical tools accessible online.
And then there's the education piece, trying to tackle stigma head-on, like the mental health first aid training.
Yes, the programs developed by Premier Secours en Santé Mentale France. These train ordinary adults, teachers, parents, colleagues, community leaders how to spot the early signs of mental distress in others, especially adolescents, and how to offer initial support and guide them towards professional help.
So turning lay people into a kind of first line of support, empowering the community.
Exactly. By destigmatizing the whole process of noticing and talking about mental health using practical knowledge, the aim is to shift the culture, to make asking for help feel less like a defeat and more like an adult, a mature, proactive step towards getting better. It's about turning that feeling of being overwhelmed into agency.
This connects really well to something else I wanted to ask about. We've talked about individual feelings and state responses. Now, how does society itself judge people who are struggling emotionally? There's this fascinating model studied in France, the social utility-based acceptance rejection model, or SUBAR. It sounds kind of cold, actually.
It's a bit stark, yes.
Yeah.
But also quite revealing, I think. The SUBAR model tries to look beyond the usual ways we think about stigma, things like whether someone is perceived as competent or maybe dangerous.
Okay, so what does it focus on instead?
It suggests that our social perception, how we accept or reject someone, especially someone with a perceived mental health issue, is judged mainly by two opposing forces. And they're both related to utility.
Utility, like how useful someone is.
Essentially, yes. The first force is called vital force. Think of this as the upward pull. It includes all the perceived positive things: skills, resources, resilience, willpower, intelligence. Basically, the individual's perceived capacity to add value to the social system or to achieve high status within it. High vital force tends to promote acceptance.
Okay, that makes sense. And the opposing force?
That's burden, the downward pull. This covers the perceived negatives: weaknesses, lack of motivation, dependence, neediness. Burden measures the perceived likelihood that the individual will weigh down the system, be it their family, their caregivers, the healthcare system, or just the social group itself. High burden tends to promote rejection and stigma.
Wow. Okay. So we're basically doing a subconscious cost-benefit analysis based on perceived usefulness versus perceived drain.
That's the core idea of the model, yes. And the French study that mapped about 15 different mental illnesses using this framework, the results really highlight how nuanced stigma is. It's not a blanket judgment. It seems to be calculated quite specifically along these two axes.
What did they find? Which conditions were most stigmatized according to this model?
The results were pretty clear. Disorders that were perceived as highly debilitating and maybe disruptive things like alcohol addiction and schizophrenia were the most rejected. They scored very low on perceived vital force, meaning people didn't see much capacity for contribution or high status.
Right.
And very high on perceived burden, high need for care, perhaps unpredictable behavior, seen as a significant drain on resources. This fits with the more traditional view that disorders seen as dangerous or disruptive face the most stigma.
But the interesting part is often in the contrast. What about the low stigma disorders in this model?
Exactly. Conditions that scored low on stigma. Things like eating disorders, generalized anxiety disorder, GAD, OCD, even autism spectrum disorder, ASD, in this study, were generally perceived more favorably. They tended to score high on vital force and relatively low on burden.
Wait, high on vital force? For things like GAD or OCD, which involve intense internal suffering, how does that work?
It's fascinating, isn't it? The thinking is that society often values, or at least recognizes, traits sometimes associated, rightly or wrongly, with these conditions. GAD and OCD might be falsely conflated with being hyper-controlled, meticulous, detail-oriented, systematic.
Traits that are valued in certain professions or high-status environments.
Precisely. So the perception might be that even though these individuals are suffering internally, they still possess significant potential to contribute, to be useful in the system. Society might view them as useful, but suffering.
That is a really harsh lens, and it puts that middle group, burnout, depression, suicidal thoughts, into a really interesting light. How did they fare?
That intermediate group was quite distinct. They were characterized by low vital force, similar to the highly stigmatized group.
So, perceived as lacking efficacy, maybe.
Exactly, lacking the perceived ability to achieve high status or take on major responsibilities. But, and this is key, they scored only intermediate or low on perceived burden.
So people didn't necessarily see them as a huge drain on society or dangerous?
Not in the same way as, say, schizophrenia was perceived in that study. The rejection wasn't primarily about the resources they might consume or the threat they might pose. It was more about their perceived lack of agency, their inability to contribute at a high level. They essentially failed the efficacy test in society's eyes.
That's a critical difference. It's almost a passive rejection based on perceived uselessness, rather than an active rejection based on fear or resource drain.
It seems so.
Ew.
And the unique case of digital addiction in that study really drove home the power of the burden dimension.
How so?
Digital addiction was depreciated almost solely based on burden, not really on vital force.
Why would that be?
Well, the study population included many students, and students are highly likely to experience the direct, immediate interpersonal constraints of someone else's excessive screen use. Think about trying to work on a group project with someone constantly on their phone, or someone withdrawing from social activities because they're glued to a screen.
Right, it directly impacts the group functioning.
Exactly. So even though digital addiction might not seem like a major disorder compared to others, its perceived burden, its interference with shared social tasks and connections was high for that specific population due to their context and familiarity with its effects. This really highlights how context shapes our perception of burden, which in turn drives rejection.
So the big takeaway from the C-bar model is, if you want to fight stigma and social rejection, it's not enough just to address fears about danger or cost. You also have to tackle this perception of utility. You have to challenge the narrative that equates emotional distress with being useless or lacking vital force.
That seems to be the implication. Low vital force and high burden were strong predictors of social distance, actual behavioral rejection. So those deep emotional messages we talked about earlier, anger demanding boundaries, sadness forcing a retreat for repair for an individual to find social acceptance, they somehow need to reintegrate these experiences into a life that is still perceived by themselves and others as having purpose and utility. Moving from that internal torment to external acceptance involves navigating this social calculation too.
Okay, this is where it gets really practical and maybe hopeful. If our emotions are carrying these functional messages and we understand these societal pressures around utility and stigma, how do we actually train ourselves to listen to those signals constructively? How do we use them?
This leads us directly into practical psychological techniques, particularly those coming out of what's called the third wave of cognitive behavioral therapies. They really focus on changing your relationship with your internal experiences, your thoughts and feelings.
The third wave, like ACT, acceptance and commitment therapy.
Exactly. ACT is a prime example. It represents a really important shift from the earlier waves. The first wave was focused mainly on changing observable behavior. The second wave, classic CBT, focused on changing the content of your thoughts, cognitive restructuring, challenging negative thoughts.
Right, arguing with the thought, trying to prove it wrong.
Yes. But ACT and other third wave therapies aren't primarily about eliminating painful symptoms or thoughts. They actually view the struggle against those internal experiences as a core part of the problem.
The struggle itself is the problem, not the feeling.
That's the core hypothesis in ACT, experiential avoidance. Basically, constantly trying to suppress, fight, control, or get rid of painful thoughts, feelings, memories, sensations. That is what often leads to psychological suffering and pathology.
Because it doesn't work, and it takes up so much energy.
Exactly. It often backfires, making the feeling stronger, more persistent. And it really limits your ability to adapt. It makes you more vulnerable, and it shrinks your life down because you're avoiding anything that might trigger the bad feeling.
So instead of fighting the anger or the shame, ACT teaches acceptance.
Acceptance, yes, but not resignation. It's about making space for the feeling, allowing it to be there without letting it dictate your actions, and then committing to living a life based on your chosen values.
So if shame hits and the thought is, I am worthless, instead of arguing, no, I'm not, what does ACT suggest?
It suggests observing the thought, using techniques that create distance. This falls under a core process called cognitive diffusion.
Diffusion, like unfusing from the thought.
Precisely. You detach from the thought itself. You recognize it as just language, words, sounds, images that your mind is producing, not as literal truth or a command you have to obey.
How do you do that practically?
There are lots of techniques. You might label the thought, there's the I'm worthless story again, or visualize putting the thought on a leaf floating down a stream and just watching it go by. Or even just saying the thought out loud slowly, or in a silly voice, to rob it of its power.
So you separate the word worthless from the actual state of being worthless. You see it as just mental noise.
You see it as mental content, yes.
Yeah.
You gain distance. And this creates space for the other key ACT processes. Acceptance, as we said, willingly making room for difficult feelings without struggling against them. And crucially, committed action based on identifying your core values.
Values are central here.
Absolutely. ACT helps you clarify what truly matters to you deep down, things like connection, creativity, kindness, learning, courage. And then you commit to taking actions, big or small, that move you towards those values, even if the difficult thoughts or feelings show up.
So the feelings might be passengers on the bus, but they don't get to drive.
That's a classic ACT metaphor, yes.
Yeah.
Your values are in the driver's seat, guiding your direction.
This really ties everything together, transforming those potentially overwhelming emotions into fuel for growth. Let's look at maybe 3 really practical, actionable strategies listeners could try, drawn from this broader toolkit of emotional intelligence.
Sounds good. A great place to start, especially for tackling shame and guilt, is Dr. Kristen Neff's self-kindness break. It's a simple, in-the-moment practice for self-compassion.
How does it work?
When you notice you're suffering, maybe you made a mistake or you're feeling really self-critical, you pause for just a minute or two. There are 3 steps. First, acknowledge the suffering mindfully. This is a moment of suffering, or this hurts, just naming it.
Okay.
Second, connect with common humanity. Suffering is a part of life, or other people feel this way too, or I'm not alone. This counters the isolating effect of shame.
Right, breaking that feeling of being uniquely flawed.
Exactly. And third, offer yourself kindness. This often involves a soothing physical gesture, like gently placing your hands over your heart or on your stomach, and offering kind words to yourself, just as you might to a friend. Something like, may I be kind to myself, or may I accept myself as I am in this moment.
That physical touch seems important, grounding it in the body.
It really is. It activates the mammalian caregiving system, releasing soothing hormones like oxytocin. It's different from just positive thinking. It's actively treating yourself with warmth.
Okay, that's powerful. What's next? Maybe something for dealing with sadness or the paralysis that can come from failure.
For that, Professor Carol Dweck's failure resume concept is fantastic. It directly tackles the fear of failure and helps reframe setbacks, fostering that crucial growth mindset.
A failure resume sounds counterintuitive. Most resumes hide failures.
That's the point. Instead of trying to bury or forget your mistakes or obstacles, you actively excavate them. You sit down and list your major failures, projects that didn't work out, relationships that ended badly, goals you spectacularly missed.
Okay, that sounds potentially painful.
It can be initially, but here's the crucial part. For each failure, you add 2 columns. Column 1, what specific lessons did I learn from this? Column 2, how did this experience or the lessons learned actually contribute to my growth, my skills, or make me more qualified for future challenges?
So you're actively transforming the failure narrative from I messed up to here's the data I acquired and here's how it made me stronger or smarter.
Precisely. You re-engineer the signal. The sadness or regret associated with a failure becomes evidence of learning, resilience, and persistence. It directly cultivates the belief that abilities can be developed through dedication and hard work, the core of a growth mindset.
Love that. Okay, one more. Maybe something addressing that feeling of aimlessness or lack of purpose that can sometimes accompany deep sadness or depression.
For that, we can adapt Dr. Viktor Frankl's ideas from logotherapy into an exercise often called the Tree of Values. Frankl argued that meaning and purpose are core human motivators.
So how does the tree work?
You visualize your life as a tree. The roots represent your deepest core values, the things that truly nourish and sustain you, like integrity, connection, growth, service, creativity, whatever they are for you.
Okay, the foundations.
Yes. The trunk represents your main life domains and daily actions, your work, relationships, health habits, how you spend your time day to day. And the branches represent your specific longer-term goals and aspirations.
And the point is to check the alignment.
Exactly. The exercise prompts you to reflect. Are my daily actions, the trunk, and my future goals, the branches, actually connected to and drawing strength from my core values, the roots? If there's a disconnect, if your trunk and branches aren't grounded in your roots, you're likely to feel empty or adrift, even if you achieve external success.
So it's a way to ensure your life choices are aligned with what gives you a sense of meaning, which can be incredibly grounding when strong emotions feel like they might sweep you away.
Precisely. It anchors you. And just to wrap up the practical side, we have to circle back quickly to communication. All this internal work, reframing anger, accepting sadness, clarifying values, it only fully lands when we can express our needs and boundaries effectively to others.
Right, communication hygiene.
Key elements there include using I messages, focusing on your experience. I feel frustrated when I'm interrupted. Rather than blaming or judging the other person, you always interrupt me.
Less accusatory, more likely to be heard.
Much more. Also, trying to calm down first before discussing something really sensitive. Communicating from the peak of anger rarely works well. And finally, making clear, direct requests. Could we agree not to interrupt each other, rather than vague complaints or demands? This allows that newly forged assertiveness to be constructive, not destructive. Hashtag outro Matt. So when we pull it all together, we've seen that these emotions we often dread, anger, sadness, guilt, shame, they really aren't the executioners they sometimes feel like. They're more like that internal technical crew we talked about.
Each with a specific job.
Exactly. Anger is the motor, signaling when boundaries need reinforcing. Sadness is that necessary cleansing, the biological downtime for repair and integration. Guilt, when functional, is the moral compass, pointing towards factual assessment and repair. And shame. Shame transforms from that dungeon of self-condemnation into a protective filter, allowing for necessary discretion and conscious vulnerability. Judur.
Yeah. This whole deep dive, it really shows that if we can recognize the function behind these intense feelings, supported by these sophisticated therapeutic frameworks like ACT, and hopefully reinforced by better public health awareness and access to support, we can actually shift. We can move from feeling overwhelmed by them to actually using them as the engine for our own growth, our own resilience. We don't necessarily have to silence those voices, even the violent-sounding ones inside.
Yeah. We just need to finally understand the message they're carrying, the technical functional message, and then use that message, that energy, as a powerful call to committed action aligned with our values.
It really does come back to that. The capacity for deep feeling is the capacity for deep change.
Absolutely. And those challenging emotions, they're not the enemy. They're the raw material for building a more resilient, more integrated, and ultimately a more meaningful life.